Welcome to Native Exiles, Alderwood Community Church's podcast, where we talk about following Jesus in the tension of being in the world and not of it. But this week, we're talking about one aspect of being in the world. It is the reality of our day and our age that entertainment is everywhere. It is endless. There is so much entertainment all around us all the time. And that's the world that we're called to live in. So how do we navigate it? That's the conversation today. I can't wait for it. Let's go. All right, Steve, pop quiz. You ready?
All right, hit me.
How many hours of Netflix do you watch every day?
Do I have to be honest on this show?
Yep. Just you and me here. Don't worry about it.
I'm going between 1.5 and 2 hours.
1.5 to 2 hours. And when are those hours falling in the day?
Generally, bedtime.
Yeah. I am not going to answer the question for me, but for you, I think you should be encouraged because we learned that the average American is engaging in 3.3 hours of streaming content.
Thank you. I always knew I was below average.
Every
Thank
single
you.
day.
Appreciate that.
And look, I think every person listening to this probably is going to resonate with the idea that we're watching a lot of content right now. And it's just a fact of the world. We dug into this a little bit and getting ready for this episode, but there is so much content out there, it's hard to even fathom the reality. So Netflix alone, if you just take one streaming service, Netflix is one of the big ones, but Netflix currently has 2.2 million minutes of content currently available on its platform. And so just to kind of put that in the context of our lives, that means that if you sat down on the couch and started watching Netflix today and you didn't sleep and you didn't eat and all you did was just watch the Netflix catalog, you would be watching Netflix for over 4 years before you finally got to the end. And of course, even that's a mirage because you would never get to the end. They keep on putting new stuff out.
At the end of 4 years, exponentially, you'd have like 12 years to go.
And as crazy as that is, I mean, that's just one streaming service. You haven't even touched Disney Plus yet.
Are you giving me permission to watch like 3 hours a night now? I mean, I got a lot of catching up to do.
The point of this episode is we all need to be watching more content than we're currently watching. Okay, no, that's not the point. But Netflix isn't even touching the surface. Like, if you are a YouTube fan, and more people watch YouTube than watch Netflix.
Right.
Okay, YouTube, get this. It's insane. On YouTube right now, there are 17,808
Minutes?
years of content. Okay? And YouTube, every minute we sit here, the problem is getting worse because there are 271,000 hours of content added every day. Okay?
Oh my goodness.
So what that means is every hour, there's more than 10,000 hours of YouTube content being generated.
That is insane.
So all I had to say, we're in a series where we're talking about technology. And last episode, one of the cases that we tried to make was that as followers of Jesus today, as native exiles today, people living in this world but not of it, we are living in a fundamentally different era than has ever come before us. Not necessarily harder than other people's experiences, but different. And one of the huge differences is just in the amount of entertainment that is available to us. You know, it used to be that there was always some sort of limit on entertainment. Mm-hmm. You know, just practically speaking, you couldn't go to the movie theater every night. You know, you couldn't go see a play. You couldn't hire a musician to come to your house. But technology's changed that, and now it truly is limitless. I mean, you can watch as much as you want as long as you want to watch,
and you can curate it to exactly what you want. I mean, 30 years ago, you were kind of stuck with what was on the 3 network channels, and that was the end of the story. Now you can just get it to tell you here is exactly what you want. Why? Have you ever heard of Spotify? It's this really cool thing. I think it just came out last year.
Steve, you are Spotify's biggest fan right now.
I am.
And
I love
it.
Spotify. It feeds me exactly what I want.
No one loves Spotify as much as you because we've all been used to it for the last decade and you just found out.
I was so disappointed when I learned that I didn't discover something. Okay.
So there's that. And then, on top of this, we're not just consumers of entertainment anymore. Now with social media, we've all become performers. We've all become producers of entertainment. And so the norm existence for human beings now is when you're not consuming entertainment, you're producing it for others. We're all in this constant cycle of making entertainment, watching it, just constantly being entertained by everything going on around us. And so you and I, we're not entertainment industry experts, but we are pastors. And so our conversation today is going to be, what is this doing to us spiritually? This reality that we live in a world where entertainment is just always all around us. Does it matter when we think about how to thrive spiritually in our world today? And I think it might.
I think it definitely has an impact on our spiritual lives, and probably a lot more than just our spiritual lives. I mean, one of the things that you and I have spent a lot of time talking about and just been captivated by is this thing that comes up kind of quietly, kind of subtly, but all throughout the Gospels, that Jesus had this habit of entering into quiet solitude. There's a verse in Luke 5 says, the news about Jesus spread even more, and the large crowds would come together to hear him and be healed of their sicknesses. Yet he often withdrew to deserted places and prayed. Where are the deserted places in our lives right now?
Yeah. I think that's just huge to think about. I mean, Jesus was overwhelmed by how many people were around him to the point where he had to walk away. He had to go up the mountaintop and leave the crowds behind, even though there were still people with needs and there were still, more questions to be asked and more teaching to do. At some point, he made it a practice often to separate and to go be in silence and solitude. And we live in a world where actually, I would make the case, there are far more demands on our attention, on our time, not that are imposed on us against our will, but actually that we are imposing on ourselves.
Exactly right.
Like, we're filling our lives with noise and with voices and with all kinds of things to fill our
No one put a gun
bandwidth.
to my head
Yeah.
to make me watch an hour and a half of Netflix last night.
Yeah. And so it's actually our self-control that is the thing that's going to be necessary for us to have any moments of silence and solitude like Jesus. But Steve, what do you think the spiritual detriment is if we don't get that time that Jesus got?
I mean, there's so many things, but I mean, just when I think of Jesus, he seemed to delight in that. It wasn't a duty for him. He delighted in it. And the ability to be able to be in God's presence, to long to be in God's presence, to be able to quiet my heart and mind and soul like Jesus did, we just don't have that. And I think it makes us anxious. I think it keeps us from being attentive to what God's doing in and around us. It just makes us kind of dull.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think the anxiety is huge. I think there's something about silence and solitude that gets you off of autopilot. So like you live your day in and day out, and you're doing life. You're going to work, you're taking care of your kids, you're coaching your kids' sports games, you're whatever. At the end of the day, you're exhausted, and so you take your dinner to the couch and you turn on Netflix and you watch content until it finally gets later than you wanted it to be before you went to bed, and you decide, okay, finally I'm gonna go to bed. You wake up the next day and just rinse and repeat, right? Autopilot. And one of the things about Jesus was he was so in tune to the voice of the Spirit. He was listening to his Father, and he wasn't on autopilot. He would stop and do things that he wasn't already on his way to do. Like he would see a need, he would see somebody with a question. He would always have time to stop and to listen to the voice of God, to see the opportunity that God put in front of him. And I think that's one of the things you lose when you remove all silence and solitude is you got blinders on. You're doing life. And if God brings an opportunity or he wants to speak something into your life, like you might not be listening at all.
We were commenting at a staff meeting recently. One of our guys has this note on his computer and it just says false urgency. And he always runs every phone call, every ministry decision when he's sitting there, he's running it through that grid. Is this false urgency? And Jesus just never seemed hurried. Yeah. He was attentive to what God was doing, and he was content to be doing God's will.
I think the other thing that happens to us spiritually when we don't take time for silence and solitude is exhaustion. And it's one of those kind of paradigm shifts for people to think about with what's going on with entertainment. Because I think what's happened often for us is that we've confused entertainment and rest. So we go to entertainment when we're exhausted. So like I said earlier, you have the long day, then you coach your kids' team, then you're scrambling to make dinner. By the end of the day, there's nothing left in the tank. You're emotionally depleted. It feels like the only thing you even have energy to do is watch television.
Yeah.
It's all you have the capacity for. And so that's what you do. But then you wake up the next day and you're operating out of this state of spiritual and emotional exhaustion.
Right.
Still, it's a cycle that never ends. And the reason is because we think that entertainment, we think that watching Netflix or streaming something or whatever is what will refill our tank emotionally. But that's not true rest.
Yeah.
So, when God created us for rest, and we have to also just take a step back theologically and remember that rest is a theological category. That God rests on the seventh day, not because he's tired, but because rest is a good in and of itself. Mm-hmm. It's a state of things being whole, of there not being any more work to do, of delighting, of enjoying what God has done. He gives us the model of resting so that we can delight in God's goodness and his completeness and what he's done for us. But there's a difference between rest and entertainment. Entertainment can be a part of rest, maybe, but that rest that is sitting in God's presence, that is bringing your attention to him, that is ceasing to strive and to work to provide for yourself, and instead entering into a state of receiving, of saying, God, what you've done for me is enough. I don't need to do anymore. I can sit and even know that things, might be falling apart around me. There might be tasks not getting done. There might be people who need my help, and they're
false urgency.
All that false urgency. I'm gonna set that aside, and I'm just going to dwell with God. I think that's what we actually need to feel any sense of restoration, to have any sense of peace in the anxiety. And we've settled for something cheaper. We've settled for just laughing and, being able to veg out and escape. And I think that if we're gonna thrive spiritually, we've got to change our focus on what rest is, what entertainment is, and how to have some healthier habits in our life as we navigate it.
It makes me think of that word picture Jesus used, that we were created for living water, and we're super exhausted, we're thirsting, we're longing for something. And it's like people who are, in a snow blizzard and they're dying of thirst and they think the snow is going to quench their thirst. It does the exact opposite. It's like drinking a bunch of alcohol. You're going to feel just way worse the next morning. It doesn't slake that thirst, satisfy that thirst that we have to be in the presence of God, to know we're safe and secure, and to know that his work's enough.
Yeah, that's good. All right, well, if we need a shift of mindset, let's get into a little bit of what that is. All right, Steve, so we're talking about how we need a change of mindset if we're going to thrive as followers of Jesus in the world we live in today when it comes to entertainment. I do want to first say, though, we're not saying that the change of mindset is that, most people in the world today think entertainment is a good thing, and you need to change your mind and decide that entertainment is evil. And
let's be as boring as we can possibly be.
We need to cancel all of our subscription services, throw our TVs out, go to dumb phones only, try to never smile as much as possible.
I'm in trouble.
So, because that's not it. So, how should we think positively about entertainment as followers of Jesus? And maybe we can just start with this, that God created us as beings that are made to enjoy things, that are made to have a good time. Like that is a gift from God. It's not something that's, a result of the fall or something like that. This is how God made us.
I mean, it's baked in from the beginning. You can't not feel God's enjoyment when you read the creation account. There's just like this creative exuberance all over the place. And then he shares it with the man and the woman that he made in his image. I mean, early on in Genesis, we're introduced to the creation of music and poetry and art. It's all there from the get-go. That's just wound into who we are.
And think about just how God made the universe. Like, did he have to make us so that we find a sunset to be beautiful? Did he have to make us so that we love music? He didn't, but he enjoys it.
Why? You got to give me a random Steve Brooks memory. I'm in Taiwan. We're at this beautiful high mountain area where we climb to the peak. We watch the sunrise with probably 200 Chinese folks there. The sun comes up, and I can guarantee you 98% of these folks are Buddhist. Maybe there's a few Christians in the batch. Who knows what they are. And as the sun crests the horizon, they break out into spontaneous applause.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking to myself, I mean, here is God's creation just delighting his people that he made.
And so you're bringing up a really good point, how enjoyment, being entertained by something, actually is an aspect of worship, where God has made us so that entertainment goes into how we praise him, how we give him glory. And one of the easiest ways to think about that is just how we sing worship songs. Part of music is entertainment. It's a catchy tune. It's words that are pleasant to sing as they flow and as the prose is captivating. And so there's something just entertaining about it. It's why non-Christians sing songs and go to concerts. It's a universal human thing that singing songs is entertaining. And God doesn't draw a line between that and worship. He includes it. That's how we worship often, is through entertainment. And so we do not want to be down entertainment. And in fact, in our Bibles, it actually warns us against people who would want to teach us that enjoying things and being entertained is evil. You want to share that with us?
Yeah, I was thinking about this scripture. It comes from 1 Timothy 4, and he's talking about these hypocrites who teach the teachings of demons, saying that people shouldn't marry, that they should abstain from certain foods, that God created to be received with gratitude, verse 3 of chapter 4, by those who believe and know the truth. For everything God created is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it's received with thanksgiving.
Yeah. Everything God created is good. It's good to enjoy. He created us as creative beings that can worship through our creative outlets by composing music and making movies and art and all of that. Like, this is a part of how God made us to worship him, to enjoy it. So we're not down entertainment.
Absolutely not.
And sometimes people can kind of get a little holier than thou and think that if you're really righteous, you don't need entertainment. I've gotten the critique several times as a preacher. I'll tell a story that I think is funny, and maybe some people do too, or use an illustration that is entertaining, and somebody will make the accusation, you're just trying to entertain us. You need to stop entertaining us and just preach the word. And
how come no one's ever accused me of that lie?
I can't speak to that, Steve. I don't. But here's what I'd say: if it ever is actually true that I am just trying to entertain people, that would be a big problem. But I am in part trying to entertain people. I hope that it's engaging sometimes to listen to me preach. I think it actually helps people grow spiritually, to be entertained as they're learning.
Jesus was delightful to listen to.
Exactly. The crowds came to him for a
They
reason.
loved him.
And so entertainment can be used as a powerful tool for worship, for growing spiritually, for all of those things. And it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be that entertainment always has some spiritual end to it. Actually,
right.
Some of the worst entertainment out there is the propaganda of Christian,
You want to name any right now?
I'll leave it aside. But entertainment can be amazing. That being said, what we're pointing out is there are some dangers. There's some ways that entertainment can be twisted that without checking it in some way, it stops being an aid to our worship and actually starts drawing our worship, right? It becomes an idol. We start thinking that we need entertainment to be okay. I mean, that's a desire we were talking about earlier, where you get to the end of the day and really you think, all I can do right now is watch Netflix. The only thing I need to be an okay whole human being is to sit down with a pint of ice cream and watch 3 hours of my favorite series or whatever. And that's more of a problem.
Well, and to go back to your original point, it's not that entertainment hasn't always had the risk of becoming an idol. That was true in Ecclesiastes when Solomon wrote it 3,000 years ago. But maybe we are in a unique time where it's just so pervasive and so overwhelming that we have some unique challenges. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about a couple of the ways that entertainment can go wrong for us. The first is maybe the low-hanging fruit. It's that sometimes, rather than let entertainment be something that draws the best out of us, that inspires our God-given desires and passions, a movie with a plot line that is captivating because it's getting at the reality of sacrificing yourself for somebody else,
and the acting is good and the plot is engaging.
Exactly, like all of that. Instead, entertainment can be something that actually draws out the worst of us, that actually appeals to our sinful desires. And just very simple examples. There's how about just pornography? I mean, pornography is an example of entertainment. It's the worst kind of entertainment that is all temptation, all
dehumanizing.
Lust. Yeah, exactly. And then you take one step away from that, and there are mainstream movies that are basically
borderline
doing the exact same thing, just maybe with a little bit more subtlety, although maybe not very much even that. But not just sexually. I mean, there's violent entertainment that is really, all it is appealing to the human desire for anger, for domination, the fantasy of being able to defeat somebody else or fight somebody else or any of those kind of things. There's entertainment that all it's doing is trying to stir up evil passions in us. That's one way that we can twist it. That has always been a thing, though. Like that's not
Right.
That's not new about the era that we're in. The newness for us is really that we would become people who live just constantly chasing the next version of what's going to entertain us, where life is a never-ending pursuit of entertainment. And that is a risk that really hardly anyone has ever had to battle before as a follower of Jesus.
Well, there's another nuance to a distinction that I think is really important here. I mean, I'm going back 35 years to my, college era, but I remember a very important book by Neil Postman called Amusing Ourselves to Death, still quoted all the time. And his basic premise was we've changed our whole discourse in society from not just being entertaining, but to being amusing.
What's the difference?
So entertainment, like the word itself, means to hold together. Basically, to grasp something with another person. And part of the enjoyment of it is that you're doing it with another person. I shared last week how my dad would listen to the radio shows, the Green Hornet or the Lone Ranger, and talk about it with his friends. He always did it with his older brother. Now we live in our little privatized worlds, Spotify, Netflix, curated for us. And we're just trying to veg out and not think. Amusement means without musing, without thinking.
Yeah.
And there's a danger in just, as you've already alluded to, turning our brains off altogether. I just want something to dull my senses so I don't have to think.
Yeah. And so that idea of amusement without thinking, another term for it is escapism. And this it's one aspect of entertainment is that it provides you an escape from real life. So for a brief moment in time, you get to stop thinking about whatever's stressing you out, whether it's a work deadline or it's a tough relationship in your life, your marriage, whatever. Like that's what a great show does. But what a great song does sometimes, it brings you to another world.
Mm-hmm.
It takes you out of the reality of wherever you are. It allows you to escape. And that, I think, has a place, personally. I think much like an anesthetic that can relieve pain for a short period of time has a place in medicine. Like, it's okay to enjoy a brief respite from the stress of life.
Emphasis on short period of time.
Right. But when that becomes your normal way of operating, where just day in, day out, you are escaping as your primary way of dealing with the stresses and the anxieties of life, that is where you really start to decline seriously in your health, in your spiritual health, your spiritual vitality, because God actually wants us to be able to deal with life, to actually be able to walk through hard things, to bring them to Him, to pray about them, to invite Him to work in those things. And when we continually take every moment where we could potentially process with God, and instead we cram entertainment into it to just forget about it for a little bit longer, that starts to build a deficit that builds up and builds up. And more, all we're doing is just trying to cram down the increasing feelings of stress and anxiety that we can barely keep at bay.
And one of the things we've talked about on this show before, and I think almost anyone certainly who lived through COVID is pretty cognizant of related to that, is just like when we are constantly in front of our screens, it kind of desensitizes us to other people. It's so easy to like speak down to other people online, to say nasty things you wouldn't otherwise say, because they're kind of impersonal. They're on the other side of some screen. You can't see their faces. That is one of the outcomes I see of just constantly being in a virtual world. We dehumanize people.
Yeah. There's a reality to being a follower of Jesus and prayer in particular. Paul will talk about praying without ceasing. This idea that to be in this world but not of it is to be constantly holding kind of two things in tension at the same time, where there's the physical reality around us, there's your spouse, your kids, your job, there's what you can see in front of you, but then simultaneously there's another reality. There's a spiritual reality of the kingdom of God, and there's what the Spirit is doing and the spiritual opportunities He's given you, and we live in those two things simultaneously. And
in the world and not of it, that has a little familiar ring to it.
Yeah. So to pray without ceasing is to live in that physical world. You're not leaving it. You still have all the physical realities, but also to constantly be aware of that spiritual dynamic of talking to God, to inviting Him to work, to asking Him to open your eyes to what's going on around you. And I think what often happens in our world today is we still live kind of in two realities at the same time, But it isn't the physical and the spiritual. It's the physical and the digital. It's I'm in the physical world, but I also have my AirPod in and I'm listening to a podcast all day long, every day.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking of living in the digital and the digital. Like when I sit, I think I talked about this recently, you know, I'm watching Monday Night Football while I'm watching a golf instructional YouTube video.
Right.
You know, I mean, just we completely overwhelm our
You're watching
senses.
a show and you're shopping on Amazon.
Exactly
You're
right.
listening to a podcast while you're reading the news. I mean, it's like sometimes that kind of escapism effect, it's wearing off too quickly. So we're just like loading on some other aspect to try
Carbo
to
loading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a real problem to that, which is that it's, I think, very difficult to bring your attention to two things at the same time. So that pray without ceasing teaching from Paul, I find to be very hard to live out, right? It's so much easier to just pay attention to one thing than two. But if you're always walking around with two, you got the physical world that you're in, you also are living in the digital space and your phone's notifying you to things that are going on some other place that's not around you. And then you're also going to try to hold the spiritual reality in your head at the same time. I mean, good luck. It's not possible. And so we don't pray without ceasing anymore. Now we are
Scroll without ceasing.
Yeah, we scroll without ceasing. That's exactly right. You know, we live in this digital world without ceasing. And that is going to cause big problems for your spiritual health if that's the reality of the world. I'll tell you, for me,
Are you getting ready to tell us how many hours of Netflix you watch right now?
I'm going to go somewhere else.
So I'm bitter about you
Netflix,
dodging that.
Netflix is certainly a challenge for me as well. And when I say Netflix, I mostly mean just that as the generic way of saying
It's like
streaming
Q-tips.
services,
Yes, I got you. Yeah.
Certainly a problem. But podcasts are actually the bigger danger for me. You know, I have headphones in my pocket all the time, you know, Bluetooth wireless headphones. I carry them with me everywhere I go. They're naturally part of my life, just like my keys and my phone and my wallet. And I love listening to podcasts. And some of it's great stuff. Some of it's, you know, it's sermons, it's theology, it's Bible Project. A lot of it is news and politics. And, you know, sometimes it's entertaining stories. It's like the Serial podcast or it's whatever. I love it. And I have found enough podcasts to fill every moment of my life so that there's always something to listen to. And I had to really become aware of the detriment that was to my spiritual life, where all the moments where before I might wake up to the spiritual reality around me, I might check in with God. I might ask him what he's wanting me to do today, or, you know, think about the meeting I'm heading to, or the, you know, family gathering, and be praying for people and thinking about what God might do there. I wasn't doing anything horrible with that time, but I was just filling it with something interesting to listen to.
Right.
And so I have had to really think differently, to think, okay, if I want to thrive as a follower of Jesus, what habits am I going to have to implement to help me do that? Because if all I do is just say yes every time I have a desire to listen, to watch, to whatever, then that isn't the recipe for spiritual health. And so in the last section today, I would love to dive into that a little bit more with you. What does it look like for us to put some habits in place that are going to help us thrive in this area of life?
You know, I just want to riff a little bit on what you said, and it leads into where we're going, I think, really well. But I was sharing with you last week about how when I was in college, there was this big stigma. I went to a Christian, pretty conservative school between, you know, whether it's okay to listen to only Christian music or secular music. I mean, this was a huge thing, you know. And I actually had this really big epiphany because I struggled with it. I have a fairly sensitive conscience. I really struggled with that when I was 18, 19 years old. And I ran across words from Paul. I think it's in 1 Corinthians 14 where he says, I will sing with my mind, but I will sing with my heart also. And I just realized that a lot of my friends who were like Christian music only, they were as mindless when they were listening to their Christian music as they would be if they had been listening to Def Leppard. You know what I mean? And so I think this is relevant in our digital era too. Like, we can have tons of Christian content. We can have sermons running all day long and Christian music on Alexa all day long and all this great content. But that also can actually take us away from the silence and the solitude that we really need to hear Jesus.
Yeah. No, that's good, man. All right, let's talk about what it looks like.
All right, Wyatt, now that you have publicly shamed me by letting everyone know your very deep, heartfelt confession that while Steve squanders away his life watching Netflix, you are watching high-minded, thought-provoking podcasts. I get it, Mr. Smarty Pants. In your many podcasts, what have you learned about how to control and tame this thing called the media beast?
Yeah, well, you know, we all have our own cross to bear. So, I mean, when you think about what should we do? Like, what are some habits we can put in place? What are some change of our mindset that might be helpful? I think there's really two things we want to hit on. The first is raise the bar of what content you're allowing into your life. For many of us, that means setting a bar in the first place. Like most of us have no bar. We will let any content into our life. All we're looking for is something to distract us from our negative emotions. So anything will do. So the first is raise the bar. And then the second would be put some boundaries around how much content you are consuming and why. So let's start with the first one. Raise the bar of content. Steve, what does that mean to you?
Holly and I, before we watch a movie, I mean, not always, but if it looks like it might be pretty risque or borderline, we'll do a little research. You know, there's plenty of online tools, and I know that can sound legalistic to some people, but, you know, when there's just enough stuff that I'm reading in this, I really don't need to see that. That's not going to help me. We'll just have a little conversation and go, let's find something else.
It's different for everybody. For some people, It might be that really violent stuff is just not good for your soul. It's not good for your psyche. It doesn't help you trust God. It makes you anxious and worried. For some people, it's sexual. You know, if sexual temptation is a big deal for you.
Or language.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just think of, you know, the biblical teaching to flee from sexual immorality, to flee from temptation. Like, I don't know exactly what that means in all circumstances, but I'm pretty sure that fleeing and streaming are not the same. So if that's a struggle for you, I might encourage you to look stuff up. And like you said, there's a lot of tools to do that. IMDb.com, there's a parental, you know, section of that'll tell you all the, you know,
that's the one we probably
violence,
use the most.
You know, sexual stuff that's in there.
That's a great point. I just want to make sure we emphasize that. You're so right. Like, different people's consciences are sensitive in different ways. You know, that's so important. Otherwise, it gets really easy to judge other people and say, oh my goodness, what's wrong with you?
Yeah. No, that's good. I think when we say raise the bar, though, I don't just mean like raise the moral bar. I mean like raise the quality bar. Like, there is so much garbage out there that just is not worth your time. Your time as a human being created in the image of God is more valuable than watching the like B-level stuff that Netflix hired just to have some amount of content on their screen. Like, choose to use your time to watch the stuff that's really going to be thought-provoking, that's really going to be gripping, that you're not going to get to the end of it and think, I just wasted 2 hours of my life. Why on earth did I watch that? You know? And so, you know, maybe that means you need a little bit more time invested in entertainment, which is a little bit of a weird thing to say, but maybe you need to spend half an hour, you know, going through some reviews of things, or like making a list of stuff you really want to see. You really want to make sure you don't miss, so that you're not just sitting mindlessly at the lowest point of your emotional day, just saying, okay, fine, Netflix, like whatever you suggest to me, I will give it a try, even though I'm pretty sure it's going to be garbage.
And maybe once in a blue moon, read a book.
What's that, Steve?
It's BOOK. It's this thing that contains a lot of printed words. I mean, even long-form journalism. You know, I have to confess, like, on my news feed, when a New York Times article comes up that's like 25 pages long, I never read it, you know? Maybe push myself to engage my intellect to, you know, stick with something a little longer, so I actually have to think. Yeah. Not all the time.
Yeah. And so here's what this means. If you're going to raise the bar, what it means is that you are going to accept that sometimes, maybe even often, there's nothing worth watching. Like, you have to accept that at the end of the day, it might
2.2 million hours. Come on. Or was it minutes?
You know, like, to me, that's with the podcasting stuff, as I'm listening to podcasting all day, every day, there were often moments where I had gotten through all the stuff I wanted to listen to, and I was just like, what do I do now? Oh my gosh, I've got to start browsing to find something else to listen to, because I can't just sit in the silence. That would be horrible, you know? And so
God forbid.
So that's the change of mindset. The change of mindset is actually silence is a powerful spiritual tool. Boredom is a powerful spiritual tool. Those are the natural moments in your day that God is inviting you to remember that he exists, to remember that he's speaking to you. And so when you narrow the amount of content that you're allowing into your life, you are expanding the amount of time in which God might actually say something to you. He might actually show up and you might pay attention to him.
Yeah, I don't want to get too specific, because I think we'll probably touch on this in some further episodes, but times when I've kind of done the enforced quiet and solitude and discipline of boredom kind of thing, it's not like you just sit there miserable. You actually find ways to occupy your mind that are actually enjoyable. It's just we've gotten out of the habit.
Yeah.
You know?
No, that's good. So part of what's going to hopefully help you to not just fill every minute of every day with content is by raising the bar or setting a bar on quality. But on the flip side, there's also just the boundaries that you put in place of even if there's a lot of great stuff out there, even if I've got a long list of things that I really want to make sure that I watch, it's still wise to have some boundaries in your life to say, how much time do I think is healthy to actually watch Netflix or listen to podcasts or even read books or any of those kinds of things, and to set a number and stick to it rather than just let your desires or your appetite for consumption dictate how much time you spend, because your appetite for consumption is very likely going to outpace what is healthy for you as a human being. And so boundaries, I think, are a huge piece. Anything that come to your mind for you, Steve, you think about boundaries?
One of the things we try to do is just make sure that we put certain electronics in our homes, iPads, phones, we put them to bed, basically.
Yeah.
At 10 o'clock, they go in the other room, and we're just not going to engage with them after that point.
I'm a parent of young kids, and I love the term for this. It's called parenting your phone.
It's so
like,
good.
Think about your phone like you would think about your 5-year-old. You're not going to let your 5-year-old stay up till 11, so don't put your phone in your hand until 11. Put it to bed. Lock it up at 8 o'clock. You wouldn't let your kid watch Netflix for 20 hours straight. Don't let your phone do that to you. Like, set some boundaries, set some limits, be a good parent of your phone. That's a great way to do boundaries. I think some of it is don't let technology, entertainment, media be what dictates your habits. Do the reverse. And what's hard is that all these companies are trying to get as much of your time and attention as possible. And so, they're setting it up to not make you think about how much time you're spending, to always get you to click on the next thing. And so I would really try hard to disable some of those ways that technology is getting after you. So for instance, on social media, like the endless scroll is designed to make it so that you never get off of the platform. But there's really helpful things in your phone, like screen time on iPhone, where you can actually set per app, this is how much time I want to spend on this app every day. And maybe that's 15 minutes or maybe it's an hour, but it's something. And when that time comes up, your phone
gives you a notification.
It actually locked you out of it. The screen goes gray and it says your time is over. And now you have to take the next step, which is to put a passcode on that and give it to someone else, because if you don't do that, it just says, hey, your time is up, and there's a big button that says, I don't care, and you just keep going. But if you actually have the discipline to have some accountability in your life, it can be a very powerful tool to break the spell. And that
digital dieting.
Yeah, and maybe that's you're putting a time limit on the games you're playing, on Netflix. Maybe it's putting a time limit on social media, on the internet browser, whatever it is. But it's saying, I'm going to decide ahead of time how much entertainment I'm going to let in my life. I'm not going to let the entertainment decide for me. And I think that's a huge thing. I just learned today as we were doing this episode, you can turn off the feature on Netflix that automatically plays the next episode, which
is the difference between going to bed at 11 and going to bed at 2:30 a.m.
I mean, just crazy. What if we lived in a world where we actually had to decide to watch something instead of it just happening to us while we sat there mindlessly on the couch, So maybe that would be something worthwhile for some people. But we're not even dictating for you what your boundaries should be. Just recognize that you probably need some. Make a decision ahead of time, and then put the things in your life you need to be able to stick to it. I think you're going to find that will dramatically change your spiritual life. As we kind of close here, I think all of this is in the pursuit of being able to be people who can listen to the voice of God, who can pay attention to what God's doing in our life, where he's inviting us to go, what he's speaking to us, what he's convicting us of. And if we're not that, we're never going to thrive spiritually. And so, as we were kind of talking about what that looks like to be those kinds of people, we were reminded of the passage in 1 Kings 19. And, this passage, Elijah has just had this mountaintop experience. He had this big showdown with all the prophets of Baal, and God showed up in this huge way. Fire from heaven consumed his sacrifice.
And the 400 prophets of Baal.
Yes. And so Elijah is coming off of this huge spiritual moment. And he thinks that kind of it's going to be smooth sailing. But in fact, his enemies now are out to kill him. He's completely demoralized. He flees into the wilderness. He's been running for days and days and days. He's mad at God. He's hopeless. He just wants to die even, And God shows up and speaks to him. And I think it's so powerful what this passage says about how God speaks. he goes out to a mountain to hear from the Lord. And it says at that moment, the Lord passed by. A great and mighty wind was tearing at the mountains and shattering cliffs before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a voice, a soft whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Because God showed up in the whisper. Mm-hmm. And I think as we think about our lives and the pace we run at and all the noise we let in, the entertainment, the podcast, the shows, all of that. I mean, my question for anybody listening would be, if God was whispering to you right now, would you be able to hear him?
Part of the point of that story is that, God has spoken in the whirlwind. That's how he spoke to Job. He spoke in the earthquake. That's how he delivered the children of Israel. He spoke in the fire and the victory that Elijah had over the prophets of Baal. But that's not the primary way he speaks. That's not what sustains us when we're exhausted and spent like Elijah was. He created us to hear that still small voice, to have that fellowship with him in our heart of hearts. I love that story.
Amen. Well, for all of us, may we have that. May we have the space to listen and to hear God. And that's my prayer for our listeners and my prayer for you and me.
It's good stuff. Thanks, Wyatt. Hey, we do hope that part of what you make time for in your busy schedules is to be entertained by Native Exiles and informed and encouraged. Thanks so much for joining us on this episode. We hope you'll continue to follow, subscribe, tell your friends about it, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next time on Native Exiles.